Guys, other than Columbina's second 5-star will be released in the next patch, namely Zibai. This character kinda comes out of nowhere because she's not tied to the main Outcry story events, but she's tied to the Lantern Rite instead, so probably the biggest Genshin event of the year, so you can expect her to have plenty of importance. She's a 5-star Sword Geo character and her role is that of a main DPS. The last Geo DPS we got before her was Navia, so she fills a niche that really got overshadowed by other releases in the past 2 years. Unlike Navia, she's a more traditional Geo DPS, statistically speaking, in that she skills off defense, but at the same time she benefits from a new reaction, Lunar Crystallize, so she also benefits from Elemental Mastery, which is unique. In fact, Lunar Crystallize is a completely offensive reaction, unlike the previous Crystallize, which was completely defensive and pretty mediocre at that. Basically, triggering Crystallize with either Zibai or Columbina on the team will create 3 Geo turrets on the field, and every 3 Crystallize triggered, they will launch an attack at the opponent, which takes into account the stats of all the characters that have participated in the reactions. I repeat, as of right now, only Zibai and Columbina enable this. In a full team, this will contribute for a couple 100,000 damage per rotation at the very least, and this already kind of makes 6.3 revolutionary for Geo, as a couple 100,000 is infinitely more than the 0 damage provided by the previous Crystallize. Also, these Geo turrets count as constructs, which is very good for a character like Chiori, who sees her damage monumentally increased if a construct is on the team. This wasn't a constant for her at all before this change, but now it will be, and that's great. Lastly, in a way, the new Crystallize also has better quality of life, as the presence of the turrets on the field will always grant you Geo Resonance if you have 2 Geo characters on the team, while before 6.3 you need to have a shield on to activate that. Technically, the current Crystallize is a shield, but since it's generally pretty fragile, it doesn't grant Geo Resonance as consistently as the new Crystallize by itself. So, you have to give it to them. Hoyo really cooked with Lunar Crystallize. It's definitely a much better increase than Lunar Electrocharge was, and definitely much better than Lunar Bloom, which is probably the worst reaction in the game, even worse than Crystallize, the previous one. Anyway, jumping to Zibai finally, she's a pretty simple character kit-wise. She relies on her elemental skill to enter a special stance, in which all her auto attacks will get infused with Geo. She's essentially a normal attack spam character, as completing her chain of 4 normal attacks will make her automatically unleash a direct lunar attack of the Crystallize reaction, of course. Just like other direct lunar attacks, Zibai's follows the baseline of its reaction, so Lunar Crystallize, but it has a higher multiplier, ignores defense, and scales off her main stat, so defense. During her elemental skill duration, she will continuously accumulate some points, which she can spend by using the elemental skill again. This will unleash another attack, and part of it will, of course, inflict direct lunar damage. Her elemental burst completes her attacks package, as it's a very simple ability which upon use deals damage on opponents with both Geo damage and direct Lunar Crystallize damage. Overall, Zibai's damage profile definitely leans towards Lunar type by a massive amount, just like the main DPS that preceded her in Outcry. But the small difference here for her is that her normal Geo damage isn't really at the same level of bad as Nefer and Flint's normal damage types. It contributes to her total output in a way that shouldn't be totally ignored. Her personal DPS on these teams at free-to-play investment is also in a really insanely high range, assuming full best lineups. Of course, her personal DPS doesn't tell the whole story of her teams, so please don't take this part as a conclusive fact, but I just wanted to point out that Zibai will debut in the game as a Geo character that deals a top 3 DPS level of personal damage, which is just unprecedented for the element. There are some caveats, however. The first one is this guy right here, Iluga. Iluga is the new Geo 4-star that's coming out on her banner, and as you could expect, he is her best support by a country mile. He's basically her llama. I don't want to talk about him extensively, because this video is about Zibai after all, so I'll just summarize what he does. He provides her with quills, which increase the damage of all of her attacks, particularly those of Lunar type. He increases her crit stats and her elemental mastery. At C4, he increases her defense by 200, and at C6, he provides her with even more crit buffs and elemental mastery. Even a low constellation in Luga is on the level of a Constellation 6 Goro in terms of buffing Zibai, and a Constellation 6 one is a very significant increase, of course. The second caveat is that Zibai has a passive which increases her defense and elemental mastery depending on how many Geo and Hydro characters are on her team. This kind of makes her current preferred lineup have Nilou Bloom vibes, in that only 2 elements are allowed. One of them is Hydro and the other one is of course Geo. Iluga doubles down on this elemental reliance by having a passive which increases his quill effect depending on the same requirement, so the presence of Hydro and Geo characters. The third caveat is that as a Geo character that benefits from elemental mastery but doesn't really care about damage bonus because lunar reactions don't benefit from it, Zibai is really unique, and there is a real possibility that she won't get much in terms of new teammates in the future. Of course, this is just an assumption, but I think the logic behind it makes sense, especially because Geo as an element doesn't really have a stellar track record in this regard. It's not all bad, however. For the Iluga thing, unlike characters such as Lama and Ineffa, who are just game-changing for Nefer and Flins respectively, Iluga is a 4-star that will be featured on the same banner as Zibai, and so it should be easier to get. Obviously, getting Constellation 6 on him might be a tall task, but if you have a lot of pulls, even if you get unlucky, the worst case scenario should be that you will get a couple constellations of Zibai, which isn't terrible at all. For the Hydro and Geo thing, it is a team restriction, but not a terrible one. Zibai herself only gets a few small statistical buffs from it, and even if the decrease is applied to Luga's quills as well, what you will lose from using a 4th character that is not Geo or Hydro won't be insanely impactful. So if the character is good enough to join her team, it may very well end up benefiting her overall. For the third thing, while I stand by the fact that her being a Geo character that is very unique may make it hard for her to get new synergizing allies in the future, there is this rumor that Sandrone is Geo, and if that's the case, she will probably end up on her team. In that scenario, she will be fine at the very least for the 6.x cycle. Okay, I'm done with all the fluff. Now let's get to some more juicy part, so her team calculations. But before that, let me remind you that if you enjoy my content but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. And also go check in Zibai in the link in description if you want to buy Primo Gems at a discounted price. Before I show teams, I just want to point out that Zibai is a very nice free-to-play weapon available, specifically Harbinger of Dawn. This weapon provides a lot of crit value, and while it has low base attack, this of course doesn't matter for a defensive scaling character like Zibai. It has a very strict requirement of needing the holder to have above 90% HP to provide some of the crit, so I've only assumed it for teams with a defensive option. For teams that don't have a good defensive option, I've used Flute of its Pizza, the craftable sword from Natlan, which is a pretty good stat stick. The main 2 teams I calculated both include Zibai, Iluga and Columbina, and then I went for either C6 Goro or Zhongli for the flex slot. Goro is using the instructor set here, which improves his supportive capabilities, while I prefer not giving it to Zhongli as well, because I see the second team as a comfort team that still deals a lot of damage, and making Zhongli's shield weaker by giving him instructor would go against that, especially because Zibai is using Harbinger of Dawn here, so Zhongli's shield getting broken at any point of the rotation may signify her losing a good chunk of her damage. The Goro team has no real sustain option, and it's kind of fully reliant on Zibai's high defense stat and your own skills to stay alive. To be honest, I don't see it as a practical option for most people, but it's worth considering for those that are open to retrying stages many times before getting perfect clears, which is a very common thing to do in Stygian. Removing Columbina for Constellation 6 Aino is not a monumental loss, mostly because as a 4-star, Aino has quicker animations and so she allows for shorter rotations. This should be useful even if you're getting Columbina, because if you have one of Flins or Nefer, who Columbina seems to be more important for, you can use Aino here and not lose an insane amount of damage. I've also calculated the team with Zibai Constellation 1, which I think makes sense to analyze, because if you plan to get Iluga Constellation 6, odds are you will get Zibai at least at Constellation 1 as well. If you're someone that likes to see things in terms of cost, so the amount of limited 5 stars needed on a team, A C1 Zibai teams at the same cost of an effort team should promise much higher damage output, which is nice. Basically, the equivalence here is that getting a Constellation 0 Zibai will cost the same as getting a Constellation 0 Nefer, but then getting a C1 Zibai and a Constellation 6 Luga from there may cost the same as getting a Constellation 0 Lama, so Zibai ends up being more cost efficient. Lastly, if you have C2 Shilonen, she should be a better option than Goro, partially because she benefits Columbina much more than him, obviously. This will solve the sustain issue on the team, which is both nice for comfort and also allows you to run Arbingero Dawn pretty easily, potentially. So overall, Zibai seems to be a very strong main DPS with a C0 to C1 ceiling that seems only replicable in terms of damage by the likes of Mavuika, Nefer on her no sustain team, and Flames if you're assuming sustain teams for all, so that's very impressive. Just to tackle the title of the video, will she be the best main DPS? It's surely possible numbers-wise, like the potential is there, but then of course the gameplay will tell the whole truth, so it's hard to say right now, but she surely has the potential to be up there. Her restrictions aren't ideal, but they're nothing new for a Geo character, so Zibai is definitely gearing up to be a very good pull. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, also go check the Columbina build guide video I posted a few days ago, and go check in eBay in the comments if you want to buy Primo Gems at a discounted price. Bye bye.